Okay, what we're getting ready to do is we're fixing the color. What am I talking about? Well, you know, sanding's only part of the equation. One of the things that makes a really nice finish is when the stain and everything is all nice and even, the colors are even, and you've got defects, you've got knots and chips and nail holes, and you know, you got to get all that stuff taken care of before you even think about coloring. Now, like I said, one of the things, the biggest keys is to have an equal surface. You want everything the same color. You know, if you put a stain on two different color woods, you're going to get two different colors. That's just the way it works. Okay, you don't have to like it, but that's the way it is. All right, guys, we're going to talk about these bleaches. Why do we need bleaches? Well, bleaches do two things in woodworking. First thing they do is they help us to equalize color. Well, look at that. And the second thing they do is they help us correct mistakes. There's three basic types of bleaches. We have oxalic acid. Now, you'll see that some hardware stores carry it, some of the box stores carry it. If they don't have it under that particular name, it's deck brightener. That's exactly what it is. Okay, oxalic acid works on all kind of different stains. Then we have chlorine, household bleach. And then we have the two-part, which is a hydrogen peroxide and lye, basically. It's an alkali. But all three of them serve different purposes. And all three of them can give you a lot of issues health-wise. There's no way I can emphasize to you enough to be extremely safe when you're doing this. You want lots of ventilation. You don't want safety glasses, you want goggles. And I ain't talking about the ones with the holes inside. You want something gas cannot get into your eyes. You want a respirator. And I ain't talking about a dust mask. In this case, this has a dust mask cartridge on it. You want one that has the chemical cartridges, designed, that's OSHA and NIOSHA approved for chemicals, pesticides, okay, and you want it to fit well. You want gloves and you want body protection. This stuff is caustic and it can burn you. Now, the other side to it is that a lot of guys out there get in their head that if a little's good, more's better. It's a male thing. And we also like to mix stuff, okay? This ain't cooking, guys. It's not what we're doing. Of any place, it's never a good idea to play chemist with finishes. It just doesn't work. But in this case, you can kill yourself. These bleaches, you start intermixing them, you can create chlorine gas. And it'll flat kill you, graveyard dead. So you never ever mix a bleach. But let's look at some of the things bleaches do for us. If you've watched the DVD on sanding, you saw using the trace coat. And if you remember the piece of oak that we put the alcohol-based dye on, and we talked about how the dye can get down into the recesses if you put too much on, but that you could actually use a chlorine bleach to kill the color. Well, here's that piece of oak. And you'll notice the top of it, its color's gone. History. That's the chlorine bleach. Now, chlorine bleach is simply put Clorox household bleach. Now, the problem with the typical chlorine bleaches that you buy in the store that you use in your clothing is that they're usually very mild, they're very weak. If you need a stronger solution, a little swimming pool shock it, and you can buy it in lesser quantity. Or just, you can go by the pool place or whatever, and a lot of hardware stores will carry this, and, mix your own. Now, chlorine bleach So this is actually some of the socket, and I've got about a tablespoon to a pint. That's a lot. That's pretty strong. And using a couple applications is better than trying to go really heavy. But you can actually watch what it does to a dye. Now I'm going to emphasize to you, it does not work on stains. Stains are heavy pigments, okay? It can help on a water-based stain, but it don't touch oil-based. See it happening? Just that quick. Now this is a water-based. This is one application. I may need two. On the back is two applications on a water-based dye. Pretty dramatic, huh? It'll flat knock the color down. Now it does not remove the dye. Just like it does to your clothing, it neutralizes the color. The second one is the oxalic acid, the deck brightener. What it works on is it works on stains that usually are iron oxide type stains. You know, a lot of woods, oaks, and some of these, just water on there, you'll get a black ring. Or like in the case of this old piece of heart pine, where it had some nails in it, and you see the black around the nails. This is the stuff, okay? Chlorine don't do anything to it. And you'll notice right here on this half, there's usually a little white powder left. And on this half, you can see where I put the oxalic acid, and of course where I didn't. On this, I usually go about 1.5 teaspoons to a pint. You can mix it stronger if you need to, but that's a good place to start. Now on the back here, this is still wet, but there's a knot right here. This is a knot. But if you notice from this point left, it was actually a big blacker than that. Killed it instantly. Well, it has to dry. Now, the problem with both of these bleaches, once you've used them, you need to neutralize them. And neutralize simply means you just need to render them ineffective anymore. The best way to do that is to take about 4 teaspoons to a pint with baking soda. Put it on there and use lots of water to neutralize it. Now in all of these bleaches, I'm going to tell you, even though you've neutralized it, when you go to sanding it, there's residual. Some of that can soak down in that wood. You can sand something that's been treated with chlorine bleach and you're going to get that chlorine coming up in your face. Again, can't emphasize enough, respirators and safety glasses. Now the least you're going to get out of this stuff, if you don't, is a super good sinus infection, probably burn your lungs, you know, and get some good blisters and stuff on your skin. That's the least you can expect if you don't use safety precautions. Okay? That get your attention? I hope. The third one is the 2-part bleaches. These are the alkali, which is a lye, and hydrogen peroxide. Now, they come in 2 parts. There's 2 ways of doing it. You can mix 2 equal parts and put it on the wood pretty quickly. My preferred way is to put part A on, then put part B on. What does this do? This is a strong stuff. Now, if you remember back when we were talking again, in the sanding DVD, we pulled out this raised panel. And I told you that no finisher would ever glue up those 3 boards. And I was right. But to get an equal balance, Billy, I want you to get in right here on this bottom. You can see that board right there in the bottom. And if you look from here up, there was if you remember, there was a great big red spot. By lightening this, I brought this panel into a basically an even color. And I could have hit it again and got it completely even. Much lighter, but equal color. Now, that's exactly what this product does. It lightens wood. And it does it pretty dramatically. You see this green on the bottom of this piece of maple? Well, that's heartwood, and it's usually pretty nasty. Now, it's not gone by no means, but it's dramatically lightened. If you actually look over here on the back side, you can see just how green it really was. And you can see where some of the bleach actually ran around the corner there and hit the back of it. Now, you're never going to get rid of that, but you can significantly lighten it. You won't do it in one application. When you're trying to lighten the old green in maples, it's going to take 2 or 3. I'll tell you that up front, but it will lighten it. Now, this piece of walnut, enough said. All right, to neutralize this stuff, you want about a 50-50 solution of simple white vinegar and water. I don't have a problem going a little stronger. You want vinegar to neutralize it. I'll tell you what, I play it real safe because I ain't a chemist, don't profess to be. I neutralize them with baking soda, then I come back and wipe them back down. After that's dry, don't mix baking soda and water. Okay? I'll hit them with the other. I don't take chances with this stuff. It helps us to control and eliminate color. The other thing the oxalic bleach will do is that a lot of times if you've got a piece of wood that's set on the floor or something and gotten wet and you've got water stains in it, the oxalic bleach will help take that out. Now, here's my progression. Here's the way I do it, because they all will do a little bit of everything, meaning that the chlorine bleach will lighten a little. And one of the things that a lot of times you're not sure of when you've got a stain like a water stain or something, you're not sure whether you've got a mineral reaction or whether you've got molds and mildews and that kind of stuff. In that case, the chlorine bleach will kill it. So my progression, the way I go, is the first I'll try is the chlorine, because it's the most common and usually pretty easily available. I know if I've got the black spots, I'm pretty much going to have to go with the oxalic acid. But I'll try the chlorine just a little bit to see. But make sure you neutralize it good, because those two will have a chemical reaction. Okay? Don't put wet on wet. Don't do it. Make sure you've cleaned it and neutralized. My last resort is the wood bleach. That simply has to do with cost. Okay? It's not super cheap. You know, but this is what bleaches do. Now, before you run out there and start bleaching everything, we're going to look at some other alternatives and ways to deal with getting some of the colors that we want. So make sure you get through the DVD series before you go getting a whole bunch of stuff. These are some of my last alternatives. I avoid them whenever possible. But the chlorine bleach, if I get too dark on a dye, it's pretty nice to know about and have available. Okay, we said we wanted to talk about an alternative to bleach, or a way not to have to use it. You ever gone into a furniture store and you look around and you see all these beautiful finishes these companies have got, and they've got poplar that looks like oak and poplar that looks like cherry, and they've got every kind of, it says a cherry finish or an oak finish, and who knows what the wood is, and you wonder how in the world they get those stains and those colors like that. Well, I'm going to show you. So, you know, ironically, most of your cherry out there is maple. You know, they make it dark, and that's just the way they do it. If you're going dark, maple will make as pretty a cherry as you ever seen. Poplar makes a gorgeous walnut. These are just facts. Here's what they do. Remember what we said, you got to get an even background. Well, the dominant color that they use is yellow. I know you think I'd have lost my mind. Well, it's all right. You won't be the first. See this Bombay over here? Billy, can you swing over here? On the original Bombay that's in Williamsburg, when this thing was built, they attempted on the insides of the drawers were built out of white pine. And they stained them. Colored them ever how. Now, for me to replicate that, that's going to be kind of tough. Because I got mahogany, I got pine. Now, what I'm about to tell you, you're going to think is the dumbest thing you've ever heard of in your entire life. Because on the sides here, I've got some dark streaks and whatever that you can't see. I'm going to spray this entire piece, every bit of it, yellow as I can get it. I know. Think I'm nuts. That's okay. Let's take a look. Remember that piece of walnut that we bleached and the end of it was just almost white? Here it is. This is one coat of yellow dye. Because remember, it went dramatically light. It went super light. This, in this area where it was really light, is about 4 coats. This is about 2 of a simple yellow dye. Dyes are the key, not stains. Now, this isn't about dyeing and staining. This is about getting ready for the color. And this is about getting an equilibrium. Dyes do the very best job. Why? Because dyes, the pigment in dyes is so small that it literally will go down into the pores. It becomes part of the wood. Stains, dyes penetrate, stains stick. Stains won't continue to get darker and darker and darker and darker with each successive coat. Dyes will. But let's look at what I'm doing. If we can focus over here a little bit on this corner cabinet, this is actually an amber dye, which is a little oranger, a little browner than what would normally be a yellow. But I'm going to dye this with kind of a light toned brown dye. Now you got to understand something about walnut. Walnut, as it ages, it lightens. Mahogany, as it ages, like cherry, darkens. Simple enough. Here's a little rule of thumb. Any wood with the word nut in it lightens as it ages. Chestnut, butternut, walnut. Any of your redwoods, redwood, cherry, mahogany, darken. Okay, right here, just for kicks and giggles, I put a little bit of water-based amber dye on there. Actually, what I've got here is an alcohol base that's going to actually be used on it. But when I come down this, see the color I'm getting? Now here's what the yellow allows me to do. Let's look at it on this. Here's what the yellow does. Can y'all see this? Can you see the amber tones that I'm getting? It's a tone. It's not a color, it's a tone. See that? See underneath there? Now what I've done by using the yellow is I have equalized the color on my piece of wood so that I don't have to take a ton of stain or a ton of dye to do it, and it just get darker and darker and darker. This allows me to keep lighter colors and lighter tones. Okay? Got it? See that good? All right. Now when this dries down and this gets a top coat on it, it's going to have a brown tone, a brown color with that honey tone coming through. Now I'm going to tell you something about wood. Cherries, look at them hard. Almost any wood, the thing that makes wood warm is amber, is that honey tone to it. It may be dark, but we see those shimmering, those little honey tones coming through. Well, yellows and ambers is what gives it to us. Now here's a good one. This is that cherry door. Now remember, we bleached this center with the 2-part bleach to kill it. Let's watch it. Now I'm going to tell you before I do this, the single best way to apply a dye is to spray it. If you don't have that capability, you really ought to consider it. There's some nice little, relatively inexpensive turbines out there that do a good job, and it really opens up another world. But even with that said, if you don't have the capability, like I said, this isn't all about dyes. But a water-based dye wipes a whole lot easier than an alcohol base. The reason is it doesn't dry as fast. Now, in the case of what I'm getting ready to do, I'm actually using an alcohol base because I want it to dry fast. And the reason I want it to dry fast is this is actually a curly cherry panel. But I don't want all the splotching and all that going on, and that's another story in another DVD. But what I want to do is I want to get an even color on this. We're going to look at that. Could I wipe it? I could. Here's my problem. If I wipe this, because I've got a blotch-prone wood, and again, this goes back to you making sure with your scraps before you start what you got. Let's look at this. Here's what I did. I put 2 coats, and actually what I was using on this was a raw sienna, which is a little brown or yellow. And I put 2 coats on this raised portion of the panel, then I put 1 coat over the whole thing. Now what I have here is just simply a oil-based stain, but it's not a real dark stain. Okay? But here's what I get when I color this. You know, one of the hardest colors in the world to emulate is natural aged cherry. Now, I doubt many of you would have considered using a yellow base to create that. And I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm going to show it to you. And you can see where I didn't wipe. Here's the point, is that by creating a nice background and an equal background, we can get beautiful colors. You remember how nasty that looked? And then you remember where, like I said, we bleached the center. Well, just for kicks and giggles, I did the back. Remember the really dark board that was in the center? Now it's dramatically reduced, but it's there. So this would be a case for the 2-part bleach, just as we did on the front. When you've got that dramatic a difference, you know, that's hard to deal with, so that's a point where you may consider the bleach. And this is the way you get those nice tones. So there's some alternatives. Fixing the color. The next thing we want to look at is doing some repairs. And that's another issue for this, is that you always do your repairs before you go to this step, because this is going to help, again, color and tone and give you that equilibrium to stain over. The other nice thing about using the dyes is the dyes do nothing to mute the grain. So let's look at this real quick. So you've not lost any of the grain in that. Not anything. Normally you would have had to make this, it would either look bad or you'd have had to make it so dark that it almost looked painted to color that. In this case, we've got the honey colors, we've got that amber, and we've got all of our grain showing. Let's take a look at some ways to repair defects in wood. Yeah, it's best that they're not there, but wood's a natural substance and it's not perfect. And then in some cases, some of the defects we deal with are self-inflicted. An example is a dent. What's a dent? A dent is it's a dent, just like you would get in metal. Now what happens when wood gets dented? Literally what happens is that the fiber in the wood gets compressed. But we can bring it back. We can swell it back up. Now this doesn't replace wood. If you got a chip or something, wood missing, it's not going to replace it, but it will remove a dent. You're driving a peg in or a nail or something and you miss and you whop it with a hammer or you drop a piece or whatever the case. There's several different ways of doing it, and probably everybody out there knows that one of the best ways to do it is to steam it. Now you can use a steam iron, a little bit of steam. A lot of times I would lay a little damp cloth over it and just kind of iron it. And be careful, you want, the hotter it is, the better. But with the steam iron, the little cloth helps because you don't want to scorch the wood around it. Now, what I've got here is a simple little clothes steamer. You can pick them up most anywhere. They're not real expensive. Now, I think can we see this dent, Billy? All right, I'm going to steam it. Now what we're going to see happen is we're going to see that dent start to swell. Here's another trick I use. What I got here is simply some really hot water. I microwaved it. Got me an eyedropper. And if I drop it in there, a lot of times just the simple hot water will allow it to swell out. Here's another neat trick. This works cool. You're going to like this. Denatured alcohol and the water, they mix. Now I'm not flooding that. I'm just getting enough. Remember what I need to get a dent out. I need steam and moisture. Or heat and moisture rather. And this will burn. And it creates a steam. Sometimes you can just go straight to the alcohol because it also has moisture. Now it will burn on top and create the steam, but the other thing that it will do is that it won't scorch your wood. Sometimes it takes a couple shots, but it'll bring it, they're lifting way out. Maybe a little bit more water, but it does do a nice job of removing them. As well does the steam. And that's pretty much removing dents. Common sense says keep the bottle away. And even though you can still see the edge of the hammer mark here, I'm pretty much out. I might need to hit it one more time. And the other thing is even after you've done that, to put a little bit of hot water on it and just let it set. You come back to it in about an hour, or whatever the case may be, it's swelled right out, sand it level. Swelling dents out, steaming them out is the best way to handle it. A lot of guys will just fill them. Because what will happen when you go to put a dye or stain or something on, the moisture that's in, whether it be oil, whether it be alcohol, whether it be water, whatever you're using as a stain or dye, it's going to soak in behind that filler and it's going to swell up and you're going to have a mess. Plus, anytime in any repair, this is the golden rule. When you can repair wood with wood, that is the best repair you can make, bar none. Now you see this knot hole? Now first of all, I really hope the best way to repair that is cut it out. Don't use it. But, you know, there's these rare occasions that you got something like that and there's just no way around it. So what do? Now I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this knot because, again, it's not something you really want to use. And you know, particularly in some of the pines and any wood, you're going to see the knots that are loose. The best way to handle that is simply try to get the knot out. Clean the sides of it. What is a knot? A knot is simply ingrain. It's a branch growing through. That's exactly what this would have been. It would have been a branch coming out. Same thing here. It's ingrain coming up through a flat grain. That's a knot. So to repair this, and like I said, on the ones that are loose, simply take it out. There's always a membrane around it. And clean that really good. Okay, that's what made it get loose. It's kind of like bark around it that's coming through your wood. Clean it off the knot, the piece that came out, and clean the inside really good. Get all the loose garbage off of it. That's one of the things in filling anything that people don't do. They don't realize you got to get down to a sound surface. So you want to make sure this, see here, this is that membrane. It's got to get out of there because it's not holding nothing. And even if you re-glue it, it's not going to do anything. So what you want to do is get that out of there. Now, here's something that works really well because this is tough. Clean it out good. Then you want to fill it. Now, an epoxy works good. A regular wood filler does not. That's too much area. That's just, you got to have something that's really going to be strong and set up good and hard. Another alternative that I like is body filler. Works great. Once you've got it filled, take something like a Forstner bit and simply set it on here. And the reason you have to fill it first is the point on the Forstner bit has to have something to guide to. And what I will do is take this and start drilling, and then I start, because this is on an angle, then I start rolling the bit back and I just drill it. Then I'll take something, a dowel, either I'll buy one or turn something. That's the same diameter, and I'll put it in there. The other thing I can do is I can simply take a piece of flat grain wood, take this, drill it just enough to make my outline. Then very carefully bandsaw to that outline and sand nicely so it fits. Just perfect. Then by removing part of the body filler down below the surface a little bit, I can actually then put that in, and I've now created a good repair. Simply filling it will work if you use an epoxy or something. But using just your regular wood fillers, it's going to give you all kind of, it's going to crack and it's not going to stay. The most common knot is one that looks like this. Very common. And if we look carefully at this knot, here's what we've got. We've got the pith, which is the center of it, and then we've got a crack on either side. What happens? Knots, again, that branch coming out, it's end grain. End grain dries out a whole lot faster than a flat grain. So the knot tries to shrink. Now, even though it's kill dried and all of that stuff, there's one thing I've learned over the years: knots continue to do that. Everybody's solution to this knot is to wipe a little bit of filler in it, sand it, and be done. You come back and look at it several months later, year later, and you're going to see it's cracked again, and you're going to see the filler has shrunk down in it. Just the way it happens. The other alternative is they'll take some sanding dust, mix it with epoxy, and put in it. It works, except that it's going to wind up showing a big black streak in it. And the other thing that I'm going to tell you that happens is the knot will usually wind up cracking somewhere else. And that's the reason for that is that knot still continues to dry. Just the way I've always seen it happen. The best way I've ever found of repairing that, now remember I just told you that if you can repair wood with wood, you've done a smart thing. Here's the way I handle these. I simply make myself some little wedges. Bandsaw them, sand the edges off. Now here's what happens. And I can break them, and what I do is I take some glue and I just start driving these wedges in. And I just keep doing it. Now I broke that off. You don't want to. You want to saw it off because I'll break off below the surface. But I'm just trying to show you the technique here. And of course I'm not using glue, but I want you to understand the technique. Then if I need more in different little spots, I can take, I'm going to fill this with wedges. I'm going to drive wood into it until it can't take anymore. Here in the center where I've got the round little hole, I simply made it kind of like a little round spear type thing. Now what this does two things. One is it replaces end grain with end grain. The second thing that it does is, of course, it replaces wood with wood. But it does something else. It also, inside of that knot, it creates a pressure. It's actually trying to compress the wood out here around this knot. It's within this knot. So that over time, as this knot is now under pressure. So over time, as this knot continues to dry out a little bit, versus cracking again or opening back up, it's actually just relaxing. And your repair stays permanent. Works great. Now what I would do, what do I use? I'll use a wood glue, I've used epoxy, whatever, just a good glue in here. Now I'll also typically do the backside. Okay, because then I've got an equal amount of pressure. It works really, really nice. Give that a shot. All right, we're going to take a look at a pretty common one. Now I know that everything is supposed to fit and work just perfect, but we all know that's not the truth. Now here's a common one. This is a dovetail, and you see what I've got here? There's a little bit of a void in it. Hand cutting, router jig, it doesn't matter. It happens. Now again, everybody's inclination is just to gob it full of filler. Not one of my favorite things. So I'm going to show you what I do. Now here's my problem. If I look in here, the glue is actually pushed up and has actually filled that. But that glue is not going to stain nor dye equally. The same. It's always going to be there. So here's a slick trick. I got to get the glue out first thing. So I'm taking a really small back saw. And all I'm going to do is clean my void. Excuse me. Now all I've done is made a very, very thin kerf. Now what I've done, I've cut myself a very, very thin strip. Now how do you cut a strip that thin? It's very simple. Don't try to ever cut something that thin between your fence on your table saw and the blade. Not going to work. Simply put, if this were the table saw blade, is cut it from the left side. In other words, make this scrap where it falls off the left of the blade. Now here's another thing you can do if you need something larger. Is what I did on this is I simply set my saw blade on about a 5 degree, depending upon what you need. What I want to do is make a knife blade. And I cut it on an angle, just taking the edge off. Then I set my blade back straight, came in right to a fine edge and cut it again. Again, cutting to the left side of the blade to where this just falls away. And it's a lot safer to use something that's a little bigger to do that with. Once I've done that, because in something this thin, it's probably going to be very, very difficult for me to get something thin enough to go in there. So what I usually do is I'll take something as simple as a scraper, scrape it to get it thinner. Belt sander, I can sand it. Then again, coating it with a little bit of glue, I simply work it in there. Let it dry, sand it off, and I have now a perfect repair. The other place this works really, really well is if you have like a mortise and tenon and you happen to have a little gap in there. You can simply use the same exact technique to fill that. Again, we go back to the same thing. Using wood to fix wood is the best. Now here's the other thing. This is a flat grain. Because I have a dovetail, I could have also used a little bit of a wedge, just a little teeny wedge like we saw with the walnut, very thin, and I could have drove it down in there. Because I have an end grain here, as well as is on this end. Works great. Okay, fillers. Now, this is one of those things that there's 10 million brands and 200 million colors. There's several ones. We've got a water base, solvent base, this is water base, polyester base, this is body filler. We've got the cycronates or cycloanolates, the hot glues, and we've got the epoxies. Now, included in the epoxies is the two-part epoxy sticks. And everybody out there, every manufacturer just about, I think anymore about every woodcraft supply store carries them. And we're going to take a look at these and their various uses. We've also got the wax fillers, and we've got the burn-in. Now these work extremely well, all of them. But they all have specific uses and they all have limitations. There's no perfect filler. You know, everybody out here they tell you to use sawdust and glue. Well, that works, except for one problem. Don't use sawdust. It's too coarse. You want to use a sanding dust or a sanding flour, if you will. You want the fine dust. And the other thing you want to do, if you're, to use a white glue, You can use the cyclonates with it. You can use the epoxies with it. But what you want to do is use the least amount of glue to make your putty. You want as much wood in there as possible. That's the reason for the flour, the wood flour. And because it's much smaller, you can make it much thicker, and it doesn't have to fill between the bigger clumps of sawdust. Makes for a good filler. But there's two ways a filler has to perform, or two considerations. One is whether you're going to, what you're trying to match, and that's the big deal. That's the big one. Now, the first thing you have to consider is, are you going to be staining over it? If you are, then it has to work with whatever stain or dye you're putting over the top of it. The second thing is, it's got to work, or is it going to work to color to match the stain you're putting over it? Here's some of my findings. The epoxies, the cyclonates, the polyesters, these are predominantly non-stainable, dyeable products. But they are tough. They are extremely tough. The water bases and the solvent base that you buy in putty form, they do a good job. They do a very good job. But they too have their limitations. An example of that would be something like this piece of walnut right here. And this is where I've got if I had a corner, or in this case an edge chipped out. Now in the case of a corner or an edge, I would try to maybe hand plane it flat a little bit and glue a piece of wood on it if I could. But in areas that you've got to have a lot of strength, or that are going to be subject to any kind of abuse, as in the corner of a drawer, a really super sharp little fine edge, or like this on an edge, your standard putties, whether it be solvent or water, just are not going to be strong enough. They're not going to do it. Everybody out here has put a little bit on a corner or something, and you close the drawer and it just pops off. They just aren't that strong. They'll tell you they are, but they're not. So in this case, the epoxies work extremely well. So do the polyesters. Now, the polyester you're going to see out here, and some of them call it super wood filler and whatever, and you're going to know it's body filler because it's going to have a catalyst with it, a hardener. Now, typically what we buy is just the body filler from the auto body supply store. And you're going to see it in two different things. It's going to either have a pink filler or a blue. We prefer the pink. It's the easiest to color, if that's what we're doing. Now, no matter what you do, going pretty well armed is something you may want to consider. All of these fillers have different names, and they are designed to emulate certain species of wood: cherry, walnut, white oak, red oak, whatever. And a lot of times they do a real good job of that. And if you're going to finish something natural, they usually do pretty good. But they're not always perfect, because from one piece of wood to the next, the color can vary a little bit. Now here's a tip. When you're dealing with redwoods, cherry, redwood, mahogany, woods that darken, if you match it in a natural state, once it ages a little bit, it's not going to match. It's going to be lighter. So always take your filler a little bit to the darker side. In the case of woods that lighten, walnut and a few of these, to stay within the range of what you've got usually works, because it's slower lightening than what the redwoods are darkening. And even if it does show up just a little bit darker down the road, it's usually not real noticeable. Like I said, the epoxies in any realm don't stain. They just don't absorb anything. So in that case, and you're going to be staining something, you want to go with something that's going to be as close to whatever you're dyeing or staining as possible. Now, one of the nice ones out here, and we like a lot, are the 2-part epoxy tubes. And what they do, this product, actually what it is, it's simply a stick with an inner core. There happens to be a little teeny membrane in there in case you're wondering why it don't get hard when it's in a tube. That once you need it, and all you do is take a slice of it off and work it in your hand, knead it up real good until it's all thoroughly mixed, and then you use it as your filler. And these work exceptionally well, and they are tenacious. They are super strong. I promise you. You can drill them, tap them, screw into them, whatever. I had a little ball up here of it I was going to show you, but it seems to have disappeared. But anyway, believe me, they're tough. The polyester does an extremely good job as well. Now, both of these, and in this case, most of them come in a universal color. And you'll see them, some of them will say natural, and some of them will say, red, or some of them will say, medium dark, or whatever the case. And to have a couple of them where you can intermix is a real good idea. You can actually take the trans tints, okay, which is a dye, and it's used it's exactly for what it implies. That's for tinting it. And the Mixol. Mixol is a pigment. You can mix it in there to get your color. The other thing you can use is you can use the universal tinting colors. I know what you're thinking. I hear you. Well, that stuff's expensive. Well, yeah, it is, okay? But the cool thing about it is that these products can be used not only in just the fillers, but they can be used in your colors, your stains, dyes, and everything else. So to be able to change the colors is a big deal, because it's what's going to help you get that really, really nice color. Now, if you look on this chart, and we're just going to talk about this briefly, you have your primary colors, which is a red, a yellow, and a blue. If you have those 3 colors, you can make pretty much any color out there. And of course, there's black and white. The primary colors are 3 colors that cannot be made from anything else. These are the dominant colors that make up our color spectrum. Secondary colors are orange, green, and purple, and that's by mixing these. Color and complement, these colors represent, if you've got too much red, add a little green. And all of these colors are designed to take you to a brown color. How much red, how much green is going to depend upon how much color, how brown it is, and everything throughout. And that's something that there's so much information out here on that we could spend a whole lot more time than we need to discussing that. All right? So you can go, but it's out there everywhere. So to find you charts that tell you all about that is very, very easy. But playing a little bit is a good way to handle it. Now, and this is the reason we tell you all the time that this is something you want to work out before you even start your construction. Because by doing that, you know what you're going to be doing. You know whether you got to have a filler that's going to match the wood in a natural state, or whether you need a filler that's going to match it underneath whatever stain or dye you're using. So the trans tint and the Mixol will tint any of the fillers. I haven't found any it doesn't, up to and including the epoxies. Now here's the tip. If you've got an area that's, say, a tear out in a piece of wood that you want to go natural with, if it's kind of gnarly down in there where it got broke out, take yourself something as simple as a carving chisel and dip it out so that the bottom of it is smooth. Take a little piece of sandpaper and get in there. You want to smooth it, even though you're making a bigger dip. System 3, for example, has an array of clear epoxies. And you can take those clear epoxies and mix them and put in there, let it dry. What's it going to do? It's going to emulate, all it's becoming is a clear finish. And the color that's in the bottom of that defect is going to show through it. But the clear epoxy is going to fill over it so that you get a level surface. Now when you sand it, it's going to turn opaque. And that's because of the sand scratch. The minute you put a finish over it, it'll come back clear, and it'll make just about a completely invisible. Now the problem with it is that those super nice clear epoxies are pretty expensive, but they really do a nice job. Now it's not going to take a stain or a dye. You can count on that. So if you're staining or dyeing it, here's what you want to do. You want to stain or dye underneath that repair. Let the stain or dye dry, then use your clear epoxy. It works great. 5-minute epoxies, and typically the epoxies that you buy at the box stores. If you look at them carefully, you're going to see that they've got various colors, a little amber or whatever to it. They're not totally clear. Now, the 5-minute epoxies and the fast setting epoxies do not work for that. And the reason they don't is that they cure too fast. And when you mix them, they become opaque, cloudy. And that's because air gets mixed in there and it dries too fast for the air to be able to get out. The other thing is they're usually too thick. So you want something that's going to dry crystal clear. And in order to do that, it's going to have to be a slow set. That's the end of that tune. Now, if you have, we talked about this with the knot, if you have a big void, a big old, something really, really nasty that you got to fill. A slick, quick way of doing it is I will use the body filler, fill it. Now this stuff is a 2-part and it dries hard. Fill it, sand it back to where it's flush. Then I'll take a carving chisel or something and I'll go around and I'll slightly reduce, I'll cut it back. In other words, I'll cut it deep by maybe, 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch. 1/16's better than an 1/8. Just make sure that you get out around the body filler just a little bit and there's none going to show through. Then I'll take one of my color specific fillers and use it over top. I've now created a hard, solid bottom, and I've created a color on top. I have a good repair. One of the things I see people do constant is I call them daubers, like the old bee, the mud dauber. They'll take some filler and they'll just barely wipe it on. No. You want to get that filler in contact with your wood. Liquids like the cyclonates or the epoxies, not the case. They're thin enough they're going to run into there. But when you get into the epoxy sticks and you get into the fillers, particularly the epoxy stick, it's pretty stiff. You want to wipe a little bit in there really, really hard and make sure it's good contact with your fill. And just like that knot we talked about, the thing you want to do is you want to make real sure that if you've got any bad stuff in there, in other words, you've got defective wood or soft wood, or you've got anything underneath here that's not going to be sound and solid, you really need to get that out of there. In the case of this, where I've got a little knot or some ingrown bark or bark inclusion, whatever you want to call it, this would be a point I would want to take a drill bit and run down in there and make sure I've got all the nasty out. Because it doesn't matter, if you put a good filler in there and the surface it's sticking to isn't sound and solid, what's the point? Now here's a hint. These work great. No matter which ones you get, I always have a black, they make a black, they have a white, and they have a pine. The pine works good on maple. But with the black and the white, I can darken a little and I can also lighten a little. Now the other way with dealing with a filler is I can put it in here and then I can color it. Which means once I've put my stain on and once I've put a top coat of finish on, I can color it. I can come in on top of it and work with it a little bit. To do that, I can take the same Mix-All Trans Tint or my powders. The best medium I've ever found for using to do this is either something like Seal Coat or a half-pound cut of shellac, a very thin shellac. You can use lacquer. You can use some water-based finish. And by simply taking just a little bit of it and your various powders or your tints out here. I'm using this on a piece of wood, and that's probably not a good idea. I can add a little bit of powder to it, and because I now have a finish, which means I have a binder. What is a binder? A binder is what's going to stick it on. And I can come in and I can lightly, gently, whatever color I need, I can touch it up. Works quite well. And there's always touch-ups. So as you can well see, we have a tendency, by the amount of tints, that we go pretty well armed. All right. This happens to be a new product that's showing up, and it's called Timbermate. Timbermate is a little unique in that it's a water-based filler, and it can be thinned and used as a pore filler or a grain filler for porous woods. Now here's what I've found with it, working with it. I don't even think it's right this as I'm talking to you that it's, as I'm filming this, that it's on the market, but I know it's headed here. It comes from Australia. One of the things that I've found with it is that it works quite nice. It's quite easy. The other thing they say is that it has almost an indefinite shelf life, and it sure seems to do nice. Okay, now as we move through this thing, again, one of the biggest issues is being able to color our fillers. That's the biggest problem. Now, some really common mistakes that are made is that to understand what we're after. What we're after is a background color. Guys will put filler in a defect and put a finish over it, and it doesn't match. And what they didn't think about was that they just now have a glob. They just now have a equal, even colored surface. And the problem with that is that it doesn't match, because the wood is going to have light tones, dark tones, and it's going to have grain. It's just like this piece of white oak. And here's a water-based filler in there. And when we put a little bit of clear finish over it, it's too light. In that case, we would want to maybe take another color and tint it. But on the other hand, if we put a stain over it, it may match just fine. But the problem we're going to encounter is that there's no grain in it. Now, in this case of this piece of walnut right here is a water-based filler, and right here is a solvent base. And right up here is that epoxy. Now, the solvent base is a little light, so I may want to color that a little bit. Now, here's some other ways of coloring it. If you're using a water-based filler, you can take a water-based stain and do it. You can also go to the craft store and you can get some of the little water-based paints for painting, pictures and stuff. And even the little acrylic paints. And you can take a little bit of that and mix it in with a water-based filler and color it. Solvent base is a little more difficult. Solvent base, you're going to have to use a lacquer base. You're going to have to use a alcohol base or something of that nature. Oil bases don't do it. Now, I'm going to step out on a limb here and I'm going to tell you something, and this has to do from years and years of using this stuff and working with it. The best filler for staining is water-based. Water-based doesn't have, all fillers have to have a binder. They have to have something to make them stick. For most part, fillers are simply a finish with a colored solid mixed in it. It can be anything from the wood flour we talked about to synthetics, whatever. That's what it is, okay? Water-based fillers don't seal themselves off as much as solvent bases. And they will take whatever you put on top of them because they're a little more porous. So they will absorb whatever goes on top. What I do here too is I can also take a little bit of stain and a very fine artist brush, use a little shellac or just like we talked about earlier, and I can kind of, real teeny little brush and kind of make me some grain in there. Here's another thing. These happen to be out here, and these are called color markers or scratch removers. They call them everything. Now, what happens with these are like a big magic marker, but they have various colors. And again, forget the name. You're going to have to play with them now. These come in a set. You can buy them individually. We always have a set because you just never know. And we can come in and we can use these to color different things. Now, you see the color I'm getting out of this? If this were going, say, a golden oak, this would probably be perfect. The color on this is called natural. There's no continuity in color names. So whether it be a filler, whether it be a stain, doesn't matter. You're going to have to look at the charts and pick as close as you can to what you need and forget what the label says. Consider it no more than maybe an indicator. I talked a little bit about the water base and the solvent, and that my experience has shown that the water base takes color better. Here's this piece of maple, and what I've got is I've got a solvent-based filler, same manufacturer. I've got a solvent-based filler here, and I've got a water base here. And you can obviously see the water base took the stain better. And this is a water-based stain on top of it. So here's the rule. If you're using a water-based stain, water-based filler's going to take it. It's not going to color an epoxy or a solvent base. They just don't. Now, if you're using a solvent base, an alcohol dye or whatever, then it will color the solvent base and it will color some on the epoxy because the alcohol base, it will bite in. Okay? The water doesn't. The water base works under water base stains as well. And it seems to work pretty good under oil base. Oil-based stains are not going to penetrate the solvent-based fillers. So if you're going to use a solvent base, then you best be prepared to make your filler match the color of your stain. And that's the hardest way to go. Now, we talked earlier about the shellac sticks, and I want to touch on them now that my knife's good and hot. This is called a burn-in knife. And you can simply take any kind of knife that you can get hot and do the same thing. Now, the way these things work is very simple, and you can intermix them, is you simply melt it, and then you just wipe it in your void. Now, I'm going to fill this little ugly knot there, but I know this isn't going to match. I'm just doing it to show you the way they work. It's not real heavy pigmented or whatever, and it will, and those are nice because they help you to camouflage a little bit more. Now, could I use these and then use a little color over top? You sure can. And you can see the way that colors in. Then a little scraping. Now, this is one of those things, basically for it to dry, all you got to do is let it cool. When you see these in a store or something and they come, or you order them or whatever, and they come in, they're broke, don't sweat it. You can melt them right back together a little bit. And the other thing is they're very hard and they dry very hard, and they have a tendency to get broke pretty easy, so don't go freaking out on that. Here's a cool one. I'm going to make a defect in this white maple. That'll do. All right. They make them in clear. Now, if you're going to use the clear, make sure you got it good and clean. And if you got something on it, simply take a little lacquer thinner or denatured alcohol and wipe it off. Make sure it's clear. Remember we talked about using that epoxy to create a deep finish? Well, guess what? These will do the same thing. Now, when a clear finish goes back over this, then what I've got is I've got a level surface that's picking up the color from underneath. All of these fillers will tell you that they don't shrink and do all that. I got one word for that, and I can't say it. They do. Let them dry really well, okay? They'll tell you they dry in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Let them dry really well. Now here's one of the other things that happens. It doesn't matter. Now if you're using a solvent-based filler and you put a water-based dye or stain over top of it, it will not dissolve it. On the other hand, if you're using a water-based filler and you use a water-based stain over it, it will soften it. Okay? So here's what I'm telling you. When you're staining and you're wiping it, don't get in there and scrub on that filled spot. If you do, you can remove every bit. You can dig your filler right out. Either one, the solvent or the water-based. If you use a solvent-based dye, and I'm talking about an alcohol-based dye, it will soften the top of even that. The only ones I've not seen that it will soften is the polyesters, which is the body filler, and or the cycronate and epoxies. But those are the most difficult to color. But they also give us the most permanent repair, particularly out on edges and whatever. Filling and learning to deal with it is almost a complete art unto itself. Now, the little wax crayons that you see out here in the little soft putties, they're designed to fill nail holes and this kind of stuff and defects from assemblies and whatever, or last minute touch-up things, and they do quite well. If you're going to put these underneath a finish, you know, you're finishing something and some defect shows up and you're like, ugh, and you got to use something like this to fix it at a last minute. Here's a tip. If you will take this and warm it, now I'm going to caution you on something. If you use something like a match, you can use a lighter, but hold it back just to warm it enough to soften it a little more. And what you do is you actually work it into your defect. Okay, then you take something like a squeegee, a credit card, razor blade, and you just kind of gently clean it off. These are not really made to deal with finishes so much. They're made to be kind of a, you know, after the fact thing, but they do work. If you do that, take a little bit of shellac or lacquer and just put a little bit on top of it to seal it down before your next coat of finish goes on top of it. Here's my last tip on fillers, particularly on open poured woods, oaks. I see people put a big old glob in there and they get it all down in the pores of the wood and you can't get it out. So when you're staining it, just, man, it looks awful. Or you're sitting there with a little something trying to pick it out. Here's a tip. If you will take just a simple piece of masking tape, and this works just as well with the burn-ins, and take something as simple as some masking tape or some of the, you know, the blue release, cut you a little notch, whatever you need to fix whatever it is you're doing and put it over your defect. So that when you fill it, it does two things. The first thing it does is it's actually going to make your filler be a little higher than the wood. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to keep you from getting filler all around out here. Okay, that's filling. This is one of those things that you're going to have to go back and watch this several times to get everything we've talked about. There's so many variables and so many variations, it's just impossible to address, and it's every scenario. And I'm going to leave you with the last tip. If you're dealing with MDF, okay, there's nothing faster, slicker, quicker, or easier, okay, than a little bit of body filler in nail holes, screw holes, and whatever. Holds great, tenacious, sands off good, doesn't shrink back, and you're done. That pretty much wraps us on this one.